President Trump gave a 90-minute speech at the Republican National Convention, and we are here for a complete analysis of body language and, even more important, his words. Some of the things we will go through in detail are: why did he mention Biden just once? And also the moment that his voice almost broke with emotion, and what was, hands down, the most powerful sentence of all his speech. So let's get down to it. Easily one of the most memorable moments of Trump's speech is his recollection of his assassination attempt. And there is something very particular about the way he spoke about those distressing minutes. I'm going to play one first clip, and let's see if you can spot something in the way he reconstructs the events.
This massive crowd of tens of thousands of people stood by and didn't move an inch. In fact, many of them bravely but automatically stood up looking for where the sniper would be. They knew immediately it was a sniper, and then began pointing at him. You can see that if you look at the group behind me. That was just a small group compared to what was in front. Nobody ran, and by not stampeding, many lives were saved. But that isn't the reason that they didn't move. The reason is that they knew I was in very serious trouble. They saw it. They saw me go down. They saw the blood and thought, actually most did, that I was dead.
Well, you can see that his body language was a bit tense going through the details of the event, and in this first clip we can also notice that this is not Trump's usual rate of speech. He tends to speak a bit faster, but he might want to take his time because of the way he's narrating it. And that's what I want you to pay attention to. More than his body language or his voice, the way he's retelling the events. And the next clip has another hint about what's so special about this.
This beautiful crowd, they didn't want to leave me. They knew I was in trouble. They didn't want to leave me. And you can see that love written all over their faces. Incredible people. They're incredible people. Bullets were flying over us, yet I felt serene. But now the Secret Service agents were putting themselves in peril. They were in very dangerous territory. Bullets were flying right over them, missing them by a very small amount of inches. And then it all stopped. Our Secret Service sniper, from a much greater distance and with only one bullet used, took the assassin's life, took him out.
I'm sure that you have noticed it by this point. He is reconstructing the events of his assassination attempt, but he puts all the weight of what was going on both in the crowd that was around him, saying that the people in the crowd had the courage to not just go running, provoking an stampede, and that indeed saved many lives. But then, in the second clip, he immediately switches to the Secret Service, that they were putting themselves in peril. And I quote, "They were in very dangerous territory." In fact, the only time he references himself is when he says, "Bullets were flying over us, yet I felt serene." It's the only time he references himself, as in, he wants to make sure to use these recollections of events to give both the crowd and the Secret Service the credit they deserved. And of course, credit to the one who made it possible for Trump to be given that speech.
And I'll tell you, I stand before you in this arena only by the grace of Almighty God.
Even later, when he starts to talk about his ear, he talks about some statistics that ear wounds are usually the bloodiest, but he doesn't talk in terms of my ear. So it's interesting that he's making sure that the retelling of his assassination attempt does not end up being about himself. And he pulls it off, including the following clip, and make sure to notice how his breathing becomes heavier.
When I rose, surrounded by Secret Service, the crowd was confused because they thought I was dead, and there was great, great sorrow. I could see that on their faces as I looked out. They didn't know I was looking out. They thought it was over. But I could see it. I wanted to do something to let them know I was okay. I raised my right arm, looked at the thousands and thousands of people that were breathlessly waiting, and started shouting, "Fight, fight, fight." Thank you. Once my clenched fist went up, and it was high into the air. You've all seen that. The crowd realized I was okay and roared with pride for our country like no crowd I have ever heard before.
It was also a touching moment when he paid a tribute to Corey Comperator, the firefighter who was fatally shot. But when he actually talks about himself, he talks in terms that he was worried about the crowd thinking that he was dead, or that at least he was wounded. So he makes it clear that he thought he must send them a message that he was okay, but that he wanted them to keep that courage up and fight. And the reason he said that word 3 times is going to be important in a minute. But just in case you haven't seen my complete analysis of President Trump's assassination attempt, I make sure to explain why did he react the way he did after standing up. And that's one thing that so many deniers want to say about this, that it was staged just because he reacted like that. Well, you can just point them to my analysis. But anyway, maybe you have your ears really sharp and tuned when Trump speaks, so you spotted one of the few moments in which his voice broke. And it happened in the previous clip. Listen again, but make sure that you pay attention to the words "roared with pride."
The crowd realized I was okay and roared with pride for our country like no crowd I have ever heard before.
Speaking of Trump's voice, this is a good moment to point out that virtually at no point of the speech he rose his voice. At no point he was screaming or shouting or having an aggressive voice tone. And that is quite odd because you can imagine that if his speech lasted 90 minutes, then at some point it could get really heated, right? Like heated up and began raising his voice and speaking of his opponents or whatever. And that's the thing. He made sure to keep his voice tone steady and calm throughout the entirety of his speech for one reason. Regarding his facial expressions, I already made a video which has been trending about how President Trump's face has changed after his assassination attempt. And that change apparently has been permanent because we see the same expression during his speech. One thing is for sure, it goes very well with his message of unity. And that is something that I'm going to mention a couple times in this analysis. The main topic of his speech was unity. And since the main topic of his speech was unity, it was like he was speaking to every single American citizen. Well, every American citizen but one.
They will not have done the damage that Biden has done. Only going to use the term once. Biden. I'm not going to use the name anymore, just one time.
So you notice that when he mentioned Biden, he mentioned him only once, and he made sure to say that he was going to mention him only once. This is for 2 reasons. The first reason is that I don't know if you have noticed that every time Biden is in interviews and anyone asks him about what is he going to do in the next 4 years, there is no actual plan. He just jumps straight to mention that they have to defeat Trump, that Trump is against democracy, that Trump is a threat, that they have to put a bullseye on Trump and all that. And at some point, people might start asking, okay, we understand, but what exactly is your plan? Because you can repeat all the times you want that inflation is under control, that the cost of life is down, but the people are not feeling that. Everyone would like to know in which city or state of the United States so-called inflation is down. And as I pointed out in my analysis of the Trump-Biden debate, one of the most pressing problems, which is the open border, which is letting so many people in, Trump addressed that at the debate, and he offered Biden the opportunity to reply. What was he doing about it? What are you doing about the border? What are you doing about the millions of people who have entered illegally into the United States? And Biden avoided the question. he did not answer. He changed the subject. So Trump knew that he had to use a completely different approach than whatever Biden has been doing so far, which is basically having no approach, but just saying that orange man bad. But at the same time, when you look at Trump's whole speech, you see that the overarching theme, the main theme of the speech is unity, that he's going to be not the president of half of Americans, or even he says that a victory of half Americans is not a real victory. In fact, that's something that he makes sure to address right at the beginning of his speech.
The discord and division in our society must be healed. We must heal it quickly. As Americans, we are bound together by a single fate and a shared destiny. We rise together or we fall apart. I am running to be president for all of America, not half of America, because there is no victory in winning for half of America. So tonight, with faith and devotion, I proudly accept your nomination for President of the United States. Thank you.
Again, the topic of unity is the single most important topic throughout the entire speech. And of course, he talks about all his plans for the next 4 years, but he makes sure to drive the point home that the only way to get there is together. That no matter who you are, we are in this together. Now, I would say that the message of unity is nice. We all want to be united and not in a confrontation, not in a constant struggle and fight and fear against our neighbors and fellow citizens. But Trump's speech needed something else. And that something else was give that unity a direction, a goal, so to speak. And that's what he did with statements like this one.
I'm here tonight to lay out a vision for the whole nation. To every citizen, whether you're a young or old man or woman, Democrat, Republican or independent, black or white, Asian or Hispanic, I extend to you a hand of loyalty and of friendship. Together we will lead America to new heights of greatness like the world has never seen before.
Yeah, that last part was important. Together we will lead America to new heights of greatness like the world has never seen before. You have to paint a picture of where are you taking that unity. It's not just the be united because people want to live better lives, and maybe that sounds a bit prosaic. We could say that people need hope and inspiration and rise from how depressing has everything become. As in, when you have these polls to teens and young adults, and they have this pessimistic views of the future, and one says, how can you have at your age such a pessimistic outlook of the future with so much energy and life in front of you? But that's what's going on. With this speech, Trump is just giving everyone an encouragement to think bigger, to dream bigger. And that's one of the ways I've always seen America. Everything is bigger than in any part of the world. That's what defines America as a nation. And that is the kind of images that Trump wants people to have in their minds with this speech. And he reinforces those ambitious goals for everyone, like in the next clip.
For too long, our nation has settled for too little. We settled for too little. We've given everything to other nations, to other people. You have been told to lower your expectations and to accept less for your families. I am here tonight with the opposite message. Your expectations are not big enough. They're not big enough.
Yeah, your expectations are not big enough. Well, I would say that we are entering Tony Robbins territory, but he's not wrong. That's something that we should be doing all the time. Have more expectations, have the push and the drive to grow and to want more, to strive for more. It is not you will own nothing and you will be happy. No. It is that you can get whatever you set your mind to, whatever you set your expectations to. Again, that's something that is real. And the United States of America has always been the nation where people come and realize their dreams, whatever those are. And that is what Trump is doing with this part of his speech. And from this theme of unity and ambition comes what is, in my opinion, one of the most powerful if not the most powerful sentences in the whole speech. And I quote, "We are Americans. Ambition is our heritage. Greatness is our birthright."
It is time to start expecting and demanding the best leadership in the world, leadership that is bold, dynamic, relentless, and fearless. We can do that. We are Americans. Ambition is our heritage. Greatness is our birthright. But as long as our energies are spent fighting each other, our destiny will remain out of reach, and that's not acceptable. We must instead take that energy and use it to realize our country's true potential and write our own thrilling chapter of the American story. We can do it together. We will unite. We are going to come together, and success will bring us together.
You see that he's speaking for every American, and any American can relate to these words. I mean, if greatness is our birthright doesn't move you, I don't know what will. He's giving people the opportunity to think bigger, to have bigger expectations. And most important of all, it is not necessary to have an inner confrontation. And speaking of confrontations, he makes sure to address not only the inner confrontations, but the outer confrontations as well.
I will end every single international crisis that the current administration has created, including the horrible war with Russia and Ukraine, which would have never happened if I was president, and the war caused by the attack on Israel, which would have never happened if I was president.
Now, I mentioned that I thought that what was one of the most powerful sentences in the whole speech. But there's one other sentence that uses an interesting principle in public speaking for greater effect. And you can learn how to use it just by watching this clip.
Nothing will sway us, nothing will slow us, and no one will ever stop us.
Nothing will sway us, nothing will slow us, and no one will ever stop us. Notice that he uses the rule of threes. 3 statements, one after the other, emphasizing the points he's been saying so far. Speaking in us terms, affirming that nothing will stop us, and no outside threat will harm the United States. These kind of figures of speech, you use them for impact. And remember that rule of giving 3 examples or reinforcing an idea 3 times in succession. In fact, this rule is so powerful that he uses it more than once, like in the following clip.
No matter what obstacle comes our way, we will not break, we will not bend, we will not back down, and I will never stop fighting for you, your family, and our magnificent country.
We will not break, we will not bend, we will not back down. Again, I cannot emphasize enough that this is a speech that perfectly he could have said with more passion and screaming and raising his voice, because the short sentences are ideal for that kind of speeches. It is obvious that an assassination attempt is a result of a heavy and toxic polarization that has reached boiling point a long time ago, and Trump knows that this polarization is one of the biggest threats to Americans. And many Americans are so immersed in this conflict, in this constant attack back and forth, that they haven't noticed it. So that's why Trump made sure to keep his voice steady and calm, because he wanted to make sure that all Americans realize that he was talking to all of them. By the way, when you use the rule of threes, it is much more impactful if you use alliteration, as in using the same initial letter for each iteration, like we will not break, we will not bend, we will not back down. So let's see if you can see another alliteration that he used right at the end of his speech.
No matter what dangers come our way, no matter what obstacles lie in our path, we will keep striving toward our shared and glorious destiny, and we will not fail. We will not fail. Together we will save this country, we will restore the republic, and we will usher in the rich and wonderful tomorrows that our people so truly deserve. America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, brighter, happier, stronger, freer, greater, and more united than ever before. And quite simply put, we will very quickly make America great again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Wisconsin. God bless you. God bless you, Wisconsin, and God bless the United States of America, our great country. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
You notice that it was not until the very end of his speech that he began to raise his voice, which in this case is mandatory as he is pushing people into action. We need to unite, we need to be ambitious, and we need to do it together. That's why he raises his voice. So what are your thoughts of President Trump's speech at the RNC? Remember that regardless of what is your political preference, one can always learn from anybody, the way they speak, the way they inspire, the way they move people, because that's something that we can use ourselves in our daily lives. But I would like to know what do you think about this in the comments. Don't forget to download my free 100 body language tips in the description of this video. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy. Much love and bliss.